Good afternoon. The virtual work session of the Annapolis City Council for Wednesday, June 22nd, 2021, will be called to order at 3:03 p.m. And my understanding is that this session can go until 5:30. Don't throw stones. At this time, would everyone willing and able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Chair, I will have to leave at 5 o'clock.
Okay, that's
Thank
fine. All righty. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the first item on the agenda?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, the first item on the agenda is ID 149-21 toward a zero emission bus fleet for Annapolis Transit, presented by Deputy Director Dubois.
Good afternoon, Dr. Dubois. How are you today?
Very good, thank you.
Good. And can you introduce the folks that are with you, please?
Yes, please. My name is Kwaku Ajimandua with the Department of Transportation. I have to my right Marcus Moore, Transportation Superintendent. He is in charge of the actual operation, so if you have operational questions, he's the person to go. To my left is Jim Martin. Jim is, he will introduce himself, but he works the Vice President for American Truck and Bus Sales. That is based in Annapolis here on Defense Highway close to Best Buy. They have some expertise in what they call electronic drives technologies for transit applications. He also has a co-worker who will be Skyped in from the West Coast. They also did start the whole idea of electric bus, especially the battery aspect. So they will be helping us answer some of the technical questions that you may have. So Jim, you may want to introduce yourself.
Sorry, I'm new at this. I'm Jim Martin with American Truck and Bus. We're located on Defense Highway in Annapolis. Actually, our roots with Gibson Equipment goes back to the 50s in Annapolis. So we've been a local company here for a long time, and certainly, willing and able to help out with the city of Annapolis transportation as they move forward with a zero emission fleet. So we're just here to help out, hopefully provide some guidelines. Oscar Pardinas is our resident professional with zero emission. He should be Skyping in soon, but I don't see him, so hopefully he'll join us soon. And he's with the manufacturer we represent, ENC, Eldorado National, in California.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jim. And I guess, Ms. Jackie, you can introduce yourself as well.
Jackie Guile, Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability.
Okay, thank you. And we can proceed.
Okay, thank you. One of the reasons why we decided to come before this council is that we have observed what we describe as kind of sometimes spontaneous, sporadic discussion of why Annapolis Transit doesn't have electric buses, especially when it comes to grants and stuff like that. So we decided to share with you the information that we have gathered to date. If you recall, not so long ago, there was a discussion during the supplemental appropriation to accept the capital grant. And we made some statement like we are looking at the technology to be more matured around 2026. Whilst it's good for those who adopt a wait-and-see approach, the technology has also increased a little bit better as compared to back in 2015, 2016. We also did indicate that at that time, the smallest electric bus we know of is about 35 foot long. Average price is $800,000. We now have new information that indicates that actually there is a 30-foot bus, electric bus that costs much less. So this is kind of some of the background that I would like to share with you or remind you as we move forward with that.
Dr.
We want,
Dubois, I'm going to stop you 1 minute just to let everyone know that the gentleman who's supposed to be Skyped in, I think he's here now. So whenever you get ready for him, just let us know.
okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.
I apologize. I had to download the Skype app, so.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We decided to present to you our strategy with respect to moving towards zero emission bus fleet in Annapolis here. So first of all, general background here. And after that, you look at our current fleet, how many buses we have, the types, and some of the basic information. There is a huge database that contains every aspect of each bus maintained by Federal Transit Administration and M.MTA. After that, we'll take a look at our replacement plan. Typically, in a grant application, there is a section where they ask you to think of 5 years from now, what vehicles may be due for replacement. So we do that. So we will share with you what we typically do as if the current situation will go on. We will use the same bus information and plug in some of the cost information we have for a 30-foot bus. So we will go through that. And after that, there is a table that talks about the summary of the diesel buses versus the electric buses. And then we move on to our action plan. So given the background information, what do you plan to do from now on? So you look at it, and we put much emphasis on the funding scenarios because at the end of the day, it's all about money. So money from the federal government, from the state government, what to cost the city government if they want to move forward. So we take a look at that. There are other prerequisites for battery electric buses. What do we know? How much it will cost? What are the technologies, and how can we actually have some kind of partnership to reduce the cost of this charging infrastructure? And other prerequisites in terms of training and maintenance of electric buses. They are totally different animals altogether from diesel. Diesel has been around for so many years. So you want to take a look at what it takes if the city starts moving towards replacing vehicles as they reach the end of their useful life, and what will be the thing that we need to have in place before we move towards that. And then we normally talk about MTA. When you do talk about MTA, there is a specific office in MTA that we deal with. That is the Office of Local Transit Support. It used to be called the Office of Planning. They do not operate any transit systems. They just offer technical assistance to the various transit agencies in the state of Maryland. We will talk briefly about that. And then we put the question, could the fiscal year 2022 be the year that we place our first order for electric buses? If that is the case, what is the cost information that we have, how much it may end up costing the city, so that everything is laid before the council, so that if they make the decision to move towards replacing the vehicles as they age or reach the end of their useful life, the city will have first-hand information of how much it will cost. And then I talked to my friends in Frederick County. They have some few electric buses. Some of them, they use their own money. Others, they did get some grants with some local share. And the experiences are the pros and cons. And then after that, we will have time for questions and answers. Okay, I think you have a copy of the presentation. We have so much information on that table, so I think we may want to make reference to what you have in your file. So this is the list of transit buses that we do have. It talks about the model year, the bus number is for us to identify it, the vehicle type. It talks about the current mileage as at, I think, as of about 2 weeks ago, when we put it together. And there is also the useful life. So once we buy the buses, how many miles does FTA expect us to use the bus before we can ask money for replacement? It is either in miles or age. So whichever comes first, we can make a case and they can side with you if the bus is too old and you don't have the parts and yet it has not met its useful life in terms of mileage. They may agree with you to get funding up to 80% to buy a replacement vehicle. So in all, we have 15 transit buses. In general, 6 of them are small buses called cutaways. I have a picture on that will give you an idea of what a cutaway is. Generally, they are much cheaper. So out of the 15, we have 6 cutaways that use gasoline. They are not diesel buses, they are gas buses, based upon the Ford F450 chassis. And then the remaining 9 are basically diesel transit buses. There is one diesel bus that actually is a hybrid diesel among that. It's almost the same size, but it has this, it has a different body that is put on the state shuttle for that. So these are the buses. The last 2 columns shows you the estimated useful life remaining. You will notice that miles and years. You may notice that the first 2 buses on the list, they are called the medium duty bus number 253 and 256. You may notice that the model year is 2005. But when you look at the last column, it shows that the remaining useful life is minus 3.5, meaning it's over. So when you do the math, it doesn't add up, right? Okay, the reason is this. We bought those buses used from Ocean City. So in the program, it takes the day that you actually put it in service at the starting date to determine the useful life. So we got them around 2011. So by that, given the useful life of 7 years, that's why we have the 3.5 there. So if you're wondering that why the model year is 2005, and now you are saying that it's just over 3 years, it's 3 years over its useful life, it doesn't make sense, but that's the explanation of that. Okay, so that is table 1. These pictures shows the 2 main types of buses we have. The one to your left is the heavy-duty 30-foot Gillick buses. They are diesel buses, and the one to your right, if I'm right here, are the cutaways. Typically, they are 16 passengers, and then the heavy-duty buses are, I believe, 23 passengers, with all seats up, but there is room for ADA on that Gillick buses. So these are the 2 main types of transit buses that we do have and use in service. So looking at the future 5-year replacement plan, so if we remain on this course, i.e. when the vehicles become due for replacement and we replace them in kind, that is as it is, we are looking at this cost. The price of $390,000 is based upon the most recent information that we have for a 30-foot bus. So in our replacements plan, as it is, you'll be looking at replacing 2 buses in FY 2022, and then you move on to FY 2023, 2024, and so on and so forth. You will notice that the costs of some of the buses are smaller, are much smaller than the heavy-duty buses. So here we are looking at the cutaways. In current dollars, if you are to replace a cutaway with another one, right now, that is the average price for that. So the last row shows you the total cost of replacement of these vehicles. So using the same information, you say, okay, you have plans to move towards zero-emission transit fleet. If that is the case, using the same information, using the same period for replacement, what will be the cost? So here we plug in the numbers. The $526,872,000 that you have, $26,872 we have here actually is the true cost of the state of Georgia contract. The state of Georgia did put out a contract on it. It has various types of transit vehicles. They have diesel, they have compressed natural gas, they do have electric buses of different sizes, 30, 35, 40, even 60 for electric buses. So based upon the state of Georgia contract and based upon the minimum options that we need, for instance, your bus video surveillance system, you will need that. You will need your bike rack. So we took these options that we would typically have on any regular diesel bus that we buy and then plug it in, and we came out with this number. These buses come with chargers, but not the infrastructure. So if you're buying it, it comes with a charging unit that once the bus comes here, if you have the infrastructure laid out, they will install it. So that includes the infrastructure. So think about it. Take FY 2022, if you recall, for regular diesel is $390,000. For a 30-foot heavy-duty battery electric bus is $526,872. So we went through those exercises. So we can see at the bottom of it, the last row has the total cost of replacement for each year. And we do this for planning purposes. As you know, as you get closer to replacing it, you may have new cost information that you plug in. But as it is, as of today, this cost information is very accurate. So what does electric bus look like? So we managed to get a picture. This is from a company called BYD Motors. BYD stands for Build Your Dreams Motors. They have been here for quite a while. If you go to their website, they started as a battery manufacturing company, and now actually it has a huge manufacturing plant in Lancaster, California, where they do manufacture several types of electric vehicles, even including trucks. So this is the kind of bus you'll be looking at if you go back to table 3, talking about the 30-foot electric buses. This is what we are looking at. So that is a picture of that. It has the bike rack. The one main difference between this one and our current bus is that this has 2 doors, maybe for safety reasons. Typically, our 30-foot buses have 1 door. One for people to get in and also the same door for people to exit. Okay, so we are looking at replacement costs. Think about tables 2 and 3. So we have taken that information and summarized it into this table, giving an idea that, okay, if you is the status quo as if you're not going to replace them with electric buses, how much it will cost total in FY 22, 23, 24, and so on and so forth. And the last column actually gives you the difference. Since the difference numbers are all positive, that is additional cost if we choose to go in the direction of replacing or start replacing vehicles with electric buses. Okay. So the next table talks about funding scenario A as is. So assuming that when our current fleet is due for replacement and we do it the same, how much would that be? For the city, the last row may be of much interest because that shows the city local match that we have to add to the grant. So FY 2022, assuming that the state and the Fed give us 80% of the cost of the bus, for the 2 buses, the city has to come up with $78,000 and so on and so forth. Please remember that in FY 24 and 25 and 26, replacement buses are small cutaway buses. That's why the price or the cost information there is totally different from the previous 2 years. Take a note of that. Okay, so here we are saying, what about if you go electric bus? What will be the funding scenario here? Based upon conversation around the country, and I remember that we did also indicate that the state is in the process of writing specifications for new rolling stock contract that will include electric buses. So during that meetings, some agencies asked, does it mean that if we choose electric bus, we get more funding? The room was quiet. So here we have assumed that current federal and state funding level for bus replacement will remain the same, i.e., they will base it upon the current price of a regular diesel bus and give us 80% of that. So that's why I have highlighted that line saying that the share of 90% for the Fed and the state is going to be based upon the price of a regular diesel bus. That doesn't mean that we may not get more, but we need to be very conservative so that when the city is ready, assuming we don't get any additional grant funds, we know how much we are willing to pay for replacing our regular diesel buses with electric buses. So here we are. So if you look at that, perhaps again, the local match role is the most important for the city. So here we are looking at that. If you are buying 2 battery electric buses in FY 2022, without the cost of the infrastructure, you are looking at just over $1 million. If you assume that we are going to get 80% of the cost of a regular diesel bus, or 90% of the cost of a regular diesel bus in form of grant, that comes to $702,000. So $351,750 will be the city share, given the current funding scenario. You could get more grants, or even you could get less, as happened in FY21, where because of the pandemic, the state did not actually give us any capital fund. So the distribution became, or the allocation became 80-20, meaning the city needs to pay 20% of the cost of the vehicle, compared to the previous time where it has been 90-10. So this is what we are looking at in terms of cost information when we start moving in that direction of replacing or purchasing electric buses. So this is a summary of the local match. So it gives us a clear picture of what is the cost to the city. And generally, what I have seen across the country is that municipalities, transit agencies actually make conscious decisions to invest in public transportation. Montgomery County has done that. New York City Transit is committed to start replacing their aging vehicles starting 2028 through 2040, where they hope to replace every diesel bus in their fleet with electric. So it has almost like 2028 to 2040 as 12 years. The idea is that by that time, the battery technology will be more matured, more reliable, and they can move forward with that. But for the 5-year plan, if you're looking at it, the local share over a 5-year period is almost close to $2 million, as compared to if you are to replace the current fleet with the same, is about $250,000. So that is the price tag that we are looking at in terms of local match when it comes to moving in the direction of replacing the fleets as they get older with the electric buses. So that is the picture in terms of cost information. So where do we get additional grants? Knowing the city financial situation, so we need to double our efforts to see what other grants are available. Perhaps our best bet is what is called the Low-No Emission Grant. It's administered by the FTA. I did read that just this past cycle of a round of grant application, the current administration actually increased the funding from $90 million to $120 million, and there are hopes that it will be even much higher the next time around. So here it provides money for low emissions, zero emissions vehicles, so we can actually get some of these grants to lease, especially if you want to use it as a test or pilot project, you can do that. Applications are generally open in February and close in April. So we did miss out. MTA did alert us, but it was too late to basically gather all the information. So what we are doing right now is that we are gathering all the necessary information so that the next time the grant application period is open, you'll be ready to submit application here. There is some rumor saying that there could be round 2 in 2021 this year, sometimes around fall. So what we have done is that we have submitted our emails, addresses to FTA, that once they make the announcement, you will receive a copy of that announcement and we start working on the low-no emission grant. Okay, so the grant is not like your earmarks. It's a very competitive type of grant across the country. All transit agencies, small, medium, and big, everybody applies. So we need to do very well to make sure that when we put in an application, we have a very good application with all the necessary documents. In some instances, even the state governor actually can give you a letter of recommendation, or we can bundle it with the state. The state also submits application for this kind of grants. If you might have heard that MTA operations did get about $3 million for a pilot project. That bought only about 3 buses and then the infrastructure. So if you look at the list of those applicants that qualify to apply for this type of grant, Annapolis municipal government actually qualifies to submit the application for that, which means that the Department of Transportation will do the paperwork and then we will submit it on behalf of the city. Yeah, so that is information, some information on the low-no emission grant. Here it gives a list of which activities are eligible. Obviously, purchasing zero-emission vehicle qualifies for that. The infrastructure qualifies for that. Some of these vehicles, you may have to retool your maintenance facility, and you can also get money for that. So you look at all the areas that we potentially can apply for grant funds under this low-no emission grant. Okay, there is much required, as with most federal governments grants. So here, if you are purchasing a bus, you can get up to 80% of the cost of the bus. You can actually collaborate with the state. The state can kick in another 10%, and then if that happens, then the local match will be about 5%. That will be very great for the city. Otherwise, you'll be looking at only 15% of the cost of a brand new electric bus. Okay, in terms of the infrastructure, that is even higher. The Fed pays about 90% of the cost of the charging infrastructure to be put in place for your new electric transit buses here. So this is one area that we'll be looking at in terms of diversifying our sources of grants, particularly for these battery electric buses that we want to pursue. I get excited because one thing that you may not know is that one of the people, or one group that really will benefit from this are the riders. Very quiet vehicle compared to a diesel car or bus that makes noise and all those things. This is very quiet. So not only the environment and potential savings here and there, but the riders will also benefit from the quiet interior of these buses that they ride every day for work. If you do take a bus, it's a little bit noisy inside. That's typical of any fossil fuel-based vehicle. But for electric, it's a totally different. Those who own electric cars, you know how quiet it is. You don't hear any engine noise. Okay, so you continue with a regular grant application, which you do it every year. We have been reading about the Department of Energy, both at the federal and the state level. They do have some kind of assistance that you would like to look into, especially when it comes to battery electric vehicles. Okay, so you look at the funding potentially where we can get additional grant funds as we move forward with electric battery electric fleet. The other piece is the charging infrastructure. We have been talking to various experts in that field. In fact, last night we did get a price quote, and I was looking at that, and it was very high, just the infrastructure. So we are looking at that. It may require upgrade to the existing utilities, new transformer, electrical boxes, and stuff like that. And through our conversation with people who have been working in this area, they did indicate that there could be an option called a TTM. It works similar to like you buy a new house, you have all the electrical wires, your light bulbs, everything is in. All that you need is the connection from outside. So BGE comes in and do the outside work and connect to that at no cost to the house or the homeowner. However, so far as we keep on using the electricity through your utility bill, guess what? You are paying back. So that's one option that we will explore and see if it really works or can work for Annapolis. I think that would be great. That would mean that there is no upfront cost to the city in terms of the infrastructure. Otherwise, you may have to come out with about $180,000. I'll go into that a little bit later. Okay, so here I talk about the charging infrastructure cost. At that time, that's the only information that I have. So I checked with Frederick County and said, how much did you pay for your infrastructure? And they did indicate that they did actually pay $175,000. That will lay the infrastructure for 10 stations. So I use that as kind of a starting point of discussion. Of course, that was about 4 or 5 years ago, so prices might have changed, either for better or for worse. But that gives an idea of what we're looking at. As of last night, we did get new information. We will share with you very soon about that. One thing that when we talk electric buses, we don't really think about, what about all your fleet is electric, battery electric, and there is a major storm or hurricane and there is power outage. Does it mean that the next morning you don't provide service because you couldn't charge your electric buses? So we will need a generator as part of the package to start with. How much it will cost, I have no idea, but I'll be glad to budget $100,000 for a very reliable generator that in case there is a power outage, we will continue to charge the vehicles and get them ready for service the next day. So in discussion with some of the companies that actually do this charging infrastructure, initial discussion is that this could be a potential location for the installation of the first 5 charging stations if you decide to move forward. So this is an area, photograph of Google Map that we have of our building. The shaded area is potential. I think we do have 7 parking spaces, and there is a piece of land between the fence, which is the fence between us and the owner of the new flooring store, that we can actually install them. Okay, so we talk about funding. I talk about charging infrastructure and the need for a generator in case of power outages. Then training. The fact that you have been a bus driver for a long time doesn't mean that you know how to drive an electric bus. So we need to give them training. Typically, when you buy the bus, when they do deliver the bus, they do send people for training. So these are some of the things that they need to go through and see. And also our maintenance. Now you're dealing with a vehicle that has very high voltage systems. You want to prevent at all costs any electrical shock or electrocution and stuff like that. They could also need specialized PPEs because we don't know what kind of chemicals, in case there's an exposure, they need to be protected. So all these things need to be in place before your electric bus actually arrives at the department. So we are looking at that. What about first responders? They need to know how to deal with electric bus. You don't want to put your police, firefighters, and even OEMs in harm's way because the bus is on fire or it has crashed, smoke coming in. What things need to be deactivated or disconnected? They need to know about this before the bus actually gets here. And of course, the fact that they have been towing our buses for some time, they also need to know how to do it for electric buses. So these are some of the prerequisites that need to be in place. It's not just getting the money to buy electric transit bus, but also all these things can happen. And they can happen concurrently, because typically when you place the order, it takes about 12 months. So within the 12 months, you're charging infrastructure, getting the people to be ready, or trying to contact various first responders that on this date you're going to have a training. We need to coordinate all these things so that when the bus is about to come and they send their technicians for the training, all these people will be ready to participate in that. And so it's not only the Department of Transportation that needs to have training for its drivers and the maintenance. We do have other city departments that need to be coordinated with for this particular training. Okay, so that brings me to our relationship with M.MTA. As I said earlier in my introduction, when you talk about M.MTA, there is a specific office that we deal with. Generally, the small or all transit agencies in the state of Maryland are described as locally operating transit system lots. So Annapolis is a lot. Annapolis Transit is one. Frederick County, Montgomery County, Prince George's, Hartford Transit, and Delmarva, they are all lots. In all, there are about 23 of us in the state. Central, East, West, North, South. So we are everywhere. That's why we do. So we are the lots. And our working relationship with M.MTA is through the Office of Local Transit Support. They do not operate any transit services. Basically, they offer technical assistance to us, training. If there are new federal rules, they will help us to meet those requirements. For instance, FTA now requires Safety Management System Plan as an adopted document, and we have no idea. So they brought in consultants. We went for several trainings. I developed a template, work with us to send the first draft, they will review. So these are kind of things we work with them. They also manage the grants that we get. When you submit a request for reimbursement, remember our grants are awarded on reimbursable basis. So when you get a grant award, it doesn't mean that the state or the Fed casts a check and send to the city. It doesn't work that way. You need to submit your invoice, and then based upon a grant agreement, you get a portion back. So that's one thing that they do. They also really help in terms of regulatory compliance, because before a case gets to FTA, it means you have ignored all the advice. So even when they do triennial reviews or come every quarter to talk with us, review our operations. They used to come here physically, but because of the pandemic, we do it virtual. And every three months we do that. If there is anything that is not going well or not according to the new regulations that you may not be aware, they will let you know and give you recommendations as to how to rectify that. Even sampling size for drug and alcohol testing, they can make a comment because they don't want it to get to FTA and say, okay, you have done this for a whole year and your sample size is wrong. So we work with them on these fronts, and they do not, again, operate any transit service. So what we have so far is that this office is writing a new contract, as I said earlier, of rolling stock. It's easier to piggyback on that contract because it meets all FTA requirements. One advantage is that if you piggyback on the contract because your grant award money is with them, they will pay for the full price of the bus. Once it's delivered and you accept it, they will send you an invoice for your local match. So if your local match is 10%, and say the bus costs, say, $100, then all that the city needs to get ready for is the 10% of the $100. That is the opposite of when we do our own procurement, because when we do our own procurement and we get a purchase order, we have to pay for the full price of the car, of the vehicle once it's delivered. And then we submit the invoice to this office for processing and payment and getting us back 90%. So when we do piggyback on all contract, it's a huge financial relief for the city. Even we don't have to send experts to the bus manufacturing site, which is a requirement to see the production of the buses to make sure that everything is according to FTA clauses and stuff like that. So that is the office we deal with, and their goal is to have a rolling stock contract that has battery electric buses on them that we can buy off that contract. Whether we get more money for that is at this time, I would say, a mystery. We don't know yet. Okay, so let's look at FY 2022. It's just around the corner. This council did approve a resolution to submit grant application. In that grant request, based upon the information we did receive in the application package, and the application package actually contains different types of vehicles that we can buy off that contract or pricing. So at that time, that's what we did. We put in the application. We did get council resolution approved, supported it. There is no award yet, so we don't know how much we're going to get. That grant application gives us money for our ADA operating, for our fixed route, and also for preventive maintenance. We also get money for replacement of the vehicles. Okay. So assuming that the city wants to move forward with the first order for the electric buses, based upon our vehicle replacement plan, we will need two. And frankly, two is we are is one-on-one basis. One diesel transit bus to be replaced by one electric bus. We know that given the current range and the current battery technology, we cannot use one electric bus in service all day long. But we have made the assumption that it's one-on-one here. So if you do that assumption here for two buses, electric bus K7M, which is on the state of Georgia contract, remember if you go back to table, I believe 3, which has the costing for electric bus information, this is the same number, 526,872 for a bus. And we are buying two as part of the replacement plan. So the total cost of the bus is just over $1 million. And then I put in your charging station. Essentially, it refers to the infrastructure because the actual unit for the charging comes with the bus. So if you put in the infrastructure for here, I put it 5 to 10 because at that time I based this number, cost information, on what I did get from Frederick County. Okay, as of last night, the price quote we did get for 5 infrastructure for 5 units is close to $180,000. So if you want to update the number, you can put in $180,000 for instead of 175. Not much difference. So we are looking at it for planning purposes. Okay. We also found out that we didn't know after I skimmed through the the proposal, the charging stations come with very complicated software that manages the use of utility and also ensure that there is no overcharges and stuff like that. So that software actually has annual licensing fee. So if you're looking at 5 units, you're looking at about $14,000 a year. So before we get into the cost savings, especially for Annapolis, we have to take all this into account to see how much we really save at the end of the day. So if we, even assuming that the $175,000 is a very good number to start with, then in FY 2022, if you would like to place order for 2 electric buses, we're looking at about $1.2 million here. So bear that in mind. So here we come to this table and say, okay, if the cost is about 1.228750, how are you going to fund this project? So remember our assumption that the level of grant, the level of capital grants we get for vehicle replacement is not going to change, at least in the short term. I'm very much certain about that. So if you do get that, then for FY 2022, in terms of grant funds for replacement of these two vehicles, we're looking at $702,000 in grant money. So with that grant money, there is local match requirement, which is $78,000. Remember, the Fed and the state will pay 90% of the cost of a regular diesel bus, which we use $390,000 for that. Okay, so 390 times 2, and then you take 90% of that. That gives you the 702, and then 10% of 780,000, I believe that was the number, give you the 78. There is a line item that now they have it on a request for payment from called local overmatch. That is, we have given you this amount of money. Okay, if you are buying a regular diesel bus, your local match is 78,000. But if you choose to buy electric bus, we do not have additional grant fund. So the difference between the total cost of the project and the total grant amount, including your required local match, is the local overmatch. So that 448,750 becomes additional cost to the city. So in FY 2022, if this scenario plays out very well, where I don't know, but my feeling is that we're not going to get much more grant funds unless we apply for, say, no grants, or look at the Department of Energy and they have grants and we apply for that. Otherwise, these numbers look pretty good for FY 2022. So if you choose to buy 2 electric buses, then the local match total will be just over $500,000. So when you come to think of buying an electric bus, at least in the short term, this is what you'll be looking at. Okay. So we try to be very more pragmatic. So we turn to a transit agency that has real-world experience with electric buses. In fact, the K7M bus is what Frederick County actually has. Only that the newer ones have been told their battery technology is much better than what they had in 2016 and even what Howard County actually bought earlier on. If you recall, Howard County has transit buses, K9S. I think the issue was that it was specialized vehicle. And not only that, they use inductive charging, which was a pilot for FTA. So FTA did pay for that. And they didn't work out. So BYD have to come to replace all the chargers and give them a new charging system for that. So in 4.5 years, in terms of fuel savings versus diesel, according to Frederick County, and I did ask their permission to share this information here, close to $400,000 in savings in almost 5 years, which is a very pretty good number in terms of maintenance costs for, I believe they have 5 over a period of 5 years, which is very significant too. $770,000 in savings. So that is the savings part. Okay. And I asked them, what are your experiences with this? They were very frank. They talked about some of the issues that they have. Of course, with any new technology, especially if you are part of the early adopters, you become like guinea pig, try and error. Typically, you get FTA grants as a pilot project, as the Howard County actually got for the inductive charging system, which is right now not a very well-proven technology. It's a wireless charging system, as compared to the chargers where you physically plug it in and charges, or what the Philadelphia Scepter uses. Remember, Philadelphia still has these trolleys or electrical grids that powers those trolleys. So Philadelphia electric buses actually are like that, only that they have rubber tires and they use the same electric grid to power those. So it's continuous charging. They didn't have to spend money. I would say not much in terms of upgrading the system, the existing system that the trolleys actually use. We don't have anything here. And inductive chargers right now is not a well-proven technology. So basically, we are looking at what currently is the best way to charge the vehicles. And according to the manufacturer, their chargers they're called smart chargers. It can when it's time for you to charge the vehicle, it will let you know that it's time to charge it. You plug it in, according to them, it takes about 2.5 hours to get it fully charged, which is pretty good. So that's good news. So here are some of the issues that Federal County actually has encountered with the electric buses. And I was kind of surprised because I thought that with these experiences and all those savings in terms of diesel and maintenance, there will be a commitment to that. Basically, you're saying that, well, kind of wait and see. And that is similar to most of the transit agencies around the country. In fact, in 2005, if I said earlier, when FTA did commission a study to look at what they called electric drive technologies for transit applications. They were looking at fuel cells, compressed natural gas, and battery electric. Everybody agreed that, yeah, that's the way to go, but given the current level of technology, is not a very good replacement of your vehicle, especially if you want to maintain the same level of service. You might have read the story of New Jersey Transit that decided to buy 118 diesel buses, and despite the fact that the governor said that any new rolling stock should have a certain percentage as electric vehicles. The reality is that the money that they had couldn't help them buy the number of electric buses to maintain the current level of service. Because in the discussion of electric buses, sometimes the customer is kind of lost. Because if I'm running my services every 15 minutes, and I'm to replace it with electric vehicles and I don't have enough money, it means that I may have to run the service every 30 minutes. That is not a good thing or the customer actually in this case is a loser, so to speak, because he now or she now has to wait for 30 minutes. So there are several factors that various transit organizations and municipalities take into account. If the funding is there, it's a great thing to move forward. If the funding is not readily available, some of them will kind of do it gradually over a period of time, and based upon the experiences, they make the final decisions here. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, that is the end of my presentation here. And the last slide say questions. What, where, when, who, why? So... And again, Jim is here, especially in terms of the technological part or what is trending in the industry. And Oscar also is listening, and they will be able to. Okay, so I'm done for now, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Dewan. I want to apologize. The gentleman in the audience who's been here the entire time we've started, I failed to ask him to identify himself.
Oh, okay. I should have, John.
I'm John Temple with Annapolis Parking. I've been talking to Clockwise. We do operate the circulator, and of course want to stay unified and move toward electrifying that service as well. So.
Okay, thank you, SP Plus, appreciate it. Well, I have one just preliminary question. Dr. Duwa, did you do a similar presentation, or have you done one for us a little bit ago?
And it was not a presentation, it was a response to some of the questions that some of the council members had when you were before you for the supplemental appropriation. Is that right, David? To formally put the grant award that we got for vehicle replacement on the books. And I think after that discussion, we thought that it would be a good idea to have a work session where we will share with you all the information we have gathered over time. But the last 2 weeks actually have been very helpful, where we have come across many updated, very good information so far as battery electric transits are concerned. So this is the first time you're doing a first formal presentation before this body.
Okay, thank you. Out of respect, I'm going to call on Alderwoman Tierney to ask the first set of questions, since she's our chair of our Transportation Standing Committee.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, just to confirm, we do have 2 buses in the fiscal year 2022 budget, 2 replacement buses?
And we have asked for grants for 2 replacement buses.
Okay,
Typically, by the time we get a grant award, the city budget has been approved. So we come back to council, just like what we did a few weeks ago, for the supplemental appropriation to add the grant money to that. But in that application that we did seek and we did get a council resolution to support it, because that is a requirement of the application process, we asked for replacement of 2 buses.
Okay. So we will continue the MTA grants. How is that used in purchasing these electric vehicles? I mean, can we apply it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Remember when that discussion came up about whether to accept the money or not, our comment was that the fact that you accept it doesn't mean that you have to use it. If you accept it and you want to use it to buy your electric bus, they have no issue with that, only that the additional cost must be borne by the city.
Okay. That's good news. Okay. 2 more. When you speak of constructing new facilities, what's involved with that? And did you include that in additional costs?
Okay, let me go back here. I think if you go back to page 20 of the presentation, where it talks about FY22, is it the
charging stations?
Yeah, that's the charging station.
I didn't know if you
yeah.
had to build new enclosures or
yeah.
what have you.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about measuring cost benefits, how do you measure the intangible of diesel emissions versus electric non-emissions? Maybe Jackie can answer that.
Now, EPA, we just got about, say, 4 weeks ago, I did receive email from EPA, which I do subscribe. They have a model that is essentially Excel-based model. So in that, if you are doing a project like this, you can go in and plug in some numbers. In terms of ridership, you can use the existing ridership, and will give you metric tons of emissions saved as a result of the ridership and the type of vehicle. So we can easily estimate that in terms of intangible benefits,
Yes.
In terms of reduction in metric tons of carbon emissions.
Yes.
So there is a way that we use, it's FTA approved, the EPA uses it. In fact, we plan to use it at the end of the fiscal year, even for our current fleet and the ridership and the mileage, how much the transit system has helped reduce carbon emissions into the environment here in Annapolis. So there is a way to do that.
Yes, and I would say that that's really, the objective here is, to minimize the emissions. So if we can monitor that benefit, the non-tangibles, if you will, in our study, that would be great. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Alderwoman Tierney. I'm going to go with age before beauty, Alderman Arnett, Alderman Savage, and Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I noticed on page 22, we have some savings that are for fuel and maintenance costs. There's some probably not terribly quantifiable savings too, also in emissions and also noise pollution. So assuming that we move to these electric buses, we'll see some things there. You showed us the average life of the light duty and heavy duty diesel buses. What would be the average life of an electric bus?
Based upon our conversation with the manufacturer and FTA requirements, these heavy duties for the 30-foot will be the same, 350,000 miles or 10 years. And according to the manufacturer, their battery unit is guaranteed for, or is warranted for 500,000 miles, 12 years. So when you buy it, basically within the useful life of the vehicle, the manufacturer will stand behind the battery technology in the electric bus. So it's, in that sense, in terms of the battery technology and the savings over, that will be 2 more years, it will be quite substantial. The numbers I put down there is what Frederick County actually has experienced so far. When we are ready, we will also do our own calculations. And perhaps once we have a couple of them deployed, we can track down the savings and compare it to the regular diesel, because the two will be used at the same time, the two types of vehicle. So it will be easy to do one-on-one comparison. Yes, you are right. In terms of the mission, that's what Alderwoman Tyranny actually did ask about it. These are intangible, but there's a way to have an idea of how much reduction in pollution. For the noise, I do not know of any model right now to measure that, but in terms of pollution, we do have one.
So when a bus is used up after the 500,000 miles, is there a cost to us to do something with that expended battery? Because they're pretty toxic materials, are they not?
Yeah, I don't know yet, but I will assume that there are several programs going on around the country to recycle those for different use. So it's not going to be put in a dumpster or something like that. And frankly, when the buses are retired, typically we are allowed to resell them. And some people will buy, rehabilitate, maybe put in a new battery and use it for some special occasions. So it's not going to be just a waste that will lead to another environmental disaster. I think that's where you are trying to go. Now, there will be a better way. I think the federal government does regulate the disposal of those kind of batteries in transit applications.
So I have others, but this will be my last until I go round two. But I noticed you showed us a very big bus. But in things that I've seen, like in Montreal, there are buses that are much smaller than the heavy-duty bus. And so this is sort of a two-parter. Are smaller buses much less expensive? And do we ever fill our big heavy-duty buses? Because it seems to me like for a city like Annapolis with narrow streets, smaller buses would be much more ideal. And if they're cheaper, even more ideal.
So far as I know, the buses that are FTA compliant, this is the smallest one that we know. There are other companies that may produce type of electric vehicles, but they do not meet the FTA requirements. I'll give an example. This same company, they have a 24, I believe, 16 passenger coach bus. Okay, I asked about them because looking at the size, it will fit very well in Annapolis environment. But they told me it's not FTA compliant, it's not ADA compliant. So in that case, we cannot use federal funds to do that. So far as I know, and I'm not saying it will not change, because as I said earlier, and I did allude to that, some of the statements we have made earlier, given the new information, have changed. Because remember, we were looking at, okay, the smallest electric bus that we know of was 35 foot. Now we know that there is a 30-foot one. Who knows, perhaps the next couple of years, we may have a 16 or 26-foot bus. But for now, if you're using federal dollars for procurement of these buses, this is the smallest one that we can have, especially in fixed route application.
I guess I'd really ask you to follow up. Brian Callahan sent us a video showing 12-passenger electric buses that have been operating in Montreal for quite a while now. I find it hard to believe they're not reliable and not ADA compliant. I think they have pretty much the same kind of rules we do, but it just seems to me like we always go for these big buses that are like trying to follow them down Duke of Gloucester after a meeting here. They're taking up both lanes. It just seems to me like we really want to go to something that's much more size-wise compatible with the city, unless there's some peak loads that would make that impractical. And quite frankly, I haven't seen any peak loaded buses lately, so it would seem to me like, and even if there were, we could probably send out 2 for peak periods of time. But in any event, I would like to see some data on the buses that are used in Montreal, because they look ideal for the city. So I appreciate that.
Okay, we will look into that, but Canadian standards, although you can bring a Canadian vehicle, I said it because I did live in Canada for a while, you can bring one here if you are moving from Canada to here to register, but there are differences in terms of standards. I know that in Canada, for instance, this is a minor issue, but just a classic example. Daytime running light became a law for a long time. In the US, it is not a requirement. So that makes me believe that even for the Montreal, we don't know whether it's Montreal Transit or it's a kind of a resort area. But if you give us the links, as Alderman Savage did one time, I did follow up with that that information, and they came back and said that, oh, we have not been, our buses have not been tested by the Altoona rules. It's not federally compliant yet. So if you find a small bus that complies with all federal rules that you can use federal funds to buy, we welcome that, because there are certain routes that have low ridership that we can put those buses on. We, at least the department, is not committed to buying big buses. It's what is available, the smallest size, and then we go for that.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman, on that. Yeah, Dr. Dubois, when you look at that, I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, if it may not be available when it comes to grant funding, that's another issue that's important. I mean, we do want to make sure that we have buses that we can use grant funding for, so add that to the list as well. So.
Yeah, you are right. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Dr. Dua, for the information today. I guess my first question piggybacks off of what Alderman Arnett was alluding to in terms of the size of the buses, because I think that's really the first question we need to answer before we figure out what we need to replace and what direction we want to go is really, do we have the adequately sized buses in our fleet? And I think it's really hard to really answer that question until we get some real-time usage ridership data. And I know we have the daily ridership information, but I think it'd be worthwhile, and this is maybe more of a question for the city manager, if we could maybe just get some data, go out there a few times during the day, during the weekend, during various times of the year to see when these buses are actually filled. Because again, as Alderman Arnett said, I think we need to figure out, are these large buses only filled, are they ever filled, and are they only filled during the peak times? And maybe there are also some other routes that really have they're just rarely ever filled, that we can even go even smaller, or use a completely different model, going towards more of an on-demand. But that's really, I think, the first question we need to answer. And I completely understand. I don't think we have all of that information currently. So I guess that's my first question for you. Are you looking to gather any more information in that regard?
Yeah, we can do that. But I would like to make this point, and it echoes what the Madam Chair said. Yeah, we can think of small buses. You can think of your peak load. The fact is, if you're going to buy the bus with federal funds, and the smallest that you can get is this size, the question is either you take it or you leave it. So if you leave it and you want to go for some of the smaller buses that are out there that do not meet federal compliant requirements, and the city can afford to buy all that, that is fine. So it does not really matter at this point. If there are much smaller electric buses out there, and then we are making a decision with respect to whether to buy the smallest federally compliant transit bus versus a 30-foot, then the issue of the peak loads become more important. At this point, that is what you're looking at, is the smallest one. So either you take it, or at this stage, you may want to say, okay, it's too big, it's 30-foot, 22 passengers. We want to go to cutaways. That is, currently we don't have any. That is federally compliant. We did actually contact Coach Equipment that builds federally compliant small buses like the cutaways. They don't have any. And because Ford doesn't have electric powertrain for their F-450s upon which they build these buses. So for right now, because the smallest bus we know is this, is the one that we're looking at. If you have a smaller one, as I said earlier, and then the question becomes, okay, which size? Because we have different sizes that are federally compliant, you can use grant funds to buy, then your request for the peak loads becomes more relevant. However, if the smallest bus is what you're looking at with 22 passengers, I don't think that would be the best way to use staff resources, because whether you do it or not, this is what you have. Unless the city makes a conscious decision that we don't want to take federal funds because the electric buses that are available are too big for the city, and then you would like to use our own money to buy something like what Alderman Arnett was talking about in Quebec, Montreal. I'll be very glad that I received the link to that company that we can investigate. So that's where we are right now. If, for instance, the new MTA rolling stock contract has electric buses that are smaller, we'll be very glad too, because there are some routes that the ridership, whether it's peak or not, it doesn't fill all the seats. Occasionally, like the green route can get full on certain times of the day, or the brown route or the red route. But if you're looking at federal funds to purchase these vehicles, so far as of today, given the information that I have, I did actually look also at the state of New Mexico contract, which has federally compliant electric buses. The smallest one is 30 foot. So far as we are using federal funds to buy a federally compliant electric bus, this is all that we have. If in the future we have much smaller one, then the question of the peak load become more relevant, because we need to do that kind of analysis to determine which route you want to put that bus on. Even then, you may run afoul of 36 of the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, because it requires us not to put one bus on a specific route at all times. So every year, as part of the grant application, they will ask us to give us a history of how we shuffled the buses around various routes. So I do get your point. I do understand that. But if you're looking at grant funds to help purchase these electric buses, so far as this is the smallest one we have, is either take it or leave it. Just like when I went to the department, they have almost $600,000 for one hybrid diesel bus. We needed buses. So we thought that we can get 2 regular diesel buses. We went to FTA, they say, you take it or you leave it. And so that's how we ended up with the 600,000 hybrid diesel in our fleet. So in the future, if the city has more money and then they want to use the money to buy smaller electric buses that is not approved, then we will do the kind of analysis that you did mention. And frankly, sometimes they will ask, why do you have this small bus on this route? So we will explain that, oh, look at the ridership numbers. It does not justify putting a larger bus just to meet the 36 requirement of the Civil Rights Act. So we will have a justification for doing that, just like what you're explaining.
So you're saying the Civil Rights Act requires that we have to keep the same bus on the route?
No, we don't. We have to rotate them unless we have...
Sorry, say that again?
Yeah, you have to rotate the buses, like you have bus A on Route 1. Next time, you can have bus 2 on the Route 1. Because if you do recall the history, there was a time where they have newer buses, they all serve the affluent neighborhoods, and the older rickety buses will serve the poor neighborhood. But if you have justification saying that, here, look at my ridership numbers, it does not, the numbers do not justify me putting a large bus. They will understand that. But just the blanket statement, why don't we get smaller buses? If it's not there, we cannot buy them with federal funds unless the city wants to use its own funds to do that.
So you're saying in order to get federal funds or state funds, the buses have, any bus has to be compliant with
Yes.
the federal standards.
Yes.
And you're saying you're unable to find you have not seen any buses under 30, any electric bus under 30 feet that complies with federal standards.
Yeah, that's correct.
Have you spoken with anybody I'm assuming that they must have some kind of list of vehicles that are compliant, but I think that might be worth more in a discussion and investigation. I mean, if that's an issue, then I think we need to be mentioning that to Maryland Municipal League and our representatives for the state, because we need to be able to secure funding. Maybe there needs to be some kind of separate, and maybe there is for all I know, some kind of Maryland certification if we want to get money from the state, that they have their own kind of list of qualified vehicles. Have you spoken with the MDOT, the Zero Emissions Vehicles Infrastructure Council? It sounds like that was set up a few years back. They may have some resources to be able to give you some more information
Okay, sure.
about options.
Yeah, so far, the two state contracts that we have looked at, they have a lot of different electric buses and CNG and gas and diesel. We got all that information. We look at all of them. So far as electric buses are concerned, this is the smallest, at least for now. We will keep our eyes out. If you find anything that is smaller, I'll be very happy to look into that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, and I think because that question I think is certainly going to come up, because a lot of the vehicles, the first group of vehicles that are hitting their life limit are the larger buses over the next few years, based on one of your earlier slides. It's all the heavy duty buses. They have 0.2 years left. So, I think we certainly need to make sure we research this some more, because we're going to be facing this question for the next fiscal year in terms of bus sizes. But I think that also begs the question about hybrid buses. That may be a nice bridge technology. And are there smaller hybrid buses that are federally qualified that we could purchase?
The two state contracts I look at, actually, there were three. One was a Vineyard Transit Authority. They didn't have any of those smaller hybrid diesel. Jim, if you're aware of anything in terms of hybrid diesel, but that is smaller than 30 foot. In fact, the one that we have is also 30 foot. But you look into that. And for hybrid diesel, what I have asked our maintenance division to do is to get me all the fuel data to look at if hybrid diesel actually leads to cost savings, and then compare it to the regular diesel and, of course, to the electric one. For the electric, it's much obvious, but for the hybrid diesel, we have one in our fleet that came along at the same time as the regular diesel buses. So we should be able to do a very good comparison in terms of cost savings in fuel and maintenance. I know that one time you have to replace the battery. We pay over $50,000 for that alone. So you will look into that. But I can assure you that if we find a federal compliant small bus, we will jump on it. We are hoping that will be part of the new rolling stock contract that MTA, Office of Local Transit Support, is writing, so that we can piggyback on that.
And so it looks like we have 9 heavy-duty buses.
Yeah, that is correct.
And this budget is replacing 2 of them, right?
Yeah, if you go back to the last,
the budget we just approved.
The budget that was approved is not part, that was for FY 2021. Because that was the supplemental appropriation where we got the FY 2021 grant.
Yeah.
And we have to use it because the grant award came in after the budget, FY 21 budget has been adopted. So that's why it came back. For FY 2022 award, it has not come back yet. That's why I used the FY 22.
But you haven't purchased the buses
No,
yet.
we have not got award yet. We haven't purchased anything yet.
So which ones on this list are getting replaced?
For FY 2020,
5209 and 5.
let me go back.
409, I'm
Yes,
guessing.
I believe so. Get back here. Okay, we are looking at 5411 and 5511. That's for the planning paper. If at that time one of these heavy duty buses, say the one for FY 2024, may be involved in an accident and is disabled, it doesn't worth replacing it, then you will switch it to the earlier year to replace it. But for planning purposes, we are looking at 5411 and 5511. And I believe when you come here, I think, let's see here. Okay, I think there are some issues with the 5411 mechanical. That's why we have them up. But again, it's for planning purpose. We can actually replace it with any of the other larger buses. If it is a mechanical, now you have a mechanical failure. Oh, I know why. Mm-hmm. Because one of them needs a new engine and crankshaft, and the price quote for replacement came around $65,000. So because it has a mechanical problem and it has met its useful life, you would like to replace that one earlier than those that may have a little bit more miles but still going strong.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I guess my point is, again, so the 30-foot buses are the ones we need to replace first. And at least to that end, we at least know that there are some 30-foot electric buses that we can replace those with in the future. I get your point based on some of your calculations and assumptions that it would cost more potentially to replace those with EV buses. And part of that, I think, is you're assuming a flat level of grant funding, yes, that $700,000, mm-hmm, as opposed to, I think we need to talk to the state, but it'd be nice if we could also assume that we'll be able to use the state grant to pay for 80-90% of the cost of an electric bus, just like we do with diesel. I don't know if the state's going to, I'm sure they'll make that shift eventually. I just don't know when. But I think that's one kind of assumption that I think we'll have to revisit it once those grants do get equalized. That's going to really help out the cost. But the other thing I think would be if you make another version of this would be to factor in some of the maintenance savings. Mm-hmm. And when you spoke with Frederick, they did mention the savings over the 5 years for fuel costs and also maintenance. And so it's not going to certainly be a significant portion, but it's going to still potentially be at least a couple tens of thousands of dollars in savings based on not needing the fuel or the maintenance. So that'd be also important to look at to make sure we get some good, accurate comparisons. One other question a couple other questions, but a question I have on the charge, I'm trying to find your
May I respond to
chart.
Your question about the savings? Well, the numbers we see here is the worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. Typically, if you're making investment, you look at the upfront cost, but you know that potentially once you make that investment, the savings in fuel cost and maintenance comes back to the city. So if you are to drill it down, whilst the initial cost of the city, assuming the current federal state capital grant level remain the same, in the long term, the city is going to basically reduce its cost significantly through the fuel and the maintenance cost. So,
through what?
Through fuel savings and maintenance cost savings of the electric buses. Mm-hmm. We have not added that into this calculation. Here we are talking about the upfront cost to the city. Should we move that? And then once these vehicles come into service, we are going to use electricity, which will eventually, based upon previous experiences, it will cost less, maintenance will cost less. So instead of the city putting up more money for maintenance, it's putting less.
Yeah.
So eventually the city will be saving towards to defray some of the initial costs that they did invest in the electric.
Sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and I think eventually when we do purchase some of them, I think we'll be able to factor if we get 2-3 electric buses, be able to go ahead and reduce the amount of diesel fuel that we need to purchase. That's built into the budget to kind of equalize that out on the front end. So, question on page 20 regarding preliminary estimates. So you have charging stations, 5 to 10 stations, but then you have quantity listed next to that, $175,000 as one. Are you saying that's one quantity of 5 to 10 stations, or is that one station?
yeah, it counts as a unit. On the state of Georgia contract, it specifies 5 to 10. So when I talked to Frederick County, they were talking about 10, and I asked them for the infrastructure, not the actual charges. Remember, I told you that the bus will come with the charging unit so that once we lay out the infrastructure, then you can basically put it on and they will program it. So at that time, I took it to mean it's a system of 5 to 10 stations. So given the fact that they bought this back in 2010 and knowing that the price will change, so I assume that with $175,000, you may get a minimum of a 5-station system. That's why I put one, referring to the system which consists of 5 stations. I don't have price for individual station infrastructure for a unit. So that's why I put in as a range. So if you look at the number and say, okay, this is the maximum, this is the minimum, for planning purposes, it gives you room instead of trying to estimate the unit price and come off.
So that includes 5 charging stations for essentially 5 different buses.
For 5 buses to be charged at the same time.
Is that a level? Are those level 2 chargers, or are those level 3 rapid DC chargers?
I have to look into that, but they do have 2 types. They do have the DC, which allows various electric buses to be charged with the same unit, and they have the AC unit that is specifically designed for the charges. Whether it's level 1 or level 2, I think that is more for passenger vehicles. But this one, according to the manufacturer, I think, can you pass this week? Yeah.
I mean, I guess what I'm asking, just because I know this also, I think, would be important to figure out, because if, in terms of what type of chargers they're talking about, because the fast chargers, they'll charge a vehicle up in a couple of hours, but a level 2 charger you can plug in overnight, it's going to potentially charge the bus overnight. And they probably have they do have a different cost, because the level 3 chargers are going to require a lot more infrastructure in terms of upgrading transformers and whatnot. And so I'm just, I know I'm getting into the details here, but I think that could potentially influence the cost estimates that we have.
Okay. Given what they did indicate, since it takes a maximum of 2.5 hours, this would be a
maximum of 2.5 for
hours to fully charge the battery in the bus.
That's what these chargers do?
Yeah. So
yeah, that might be, I'm kind of curious if that's what Frederick did. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so
they don't just plug them in overnight. They have, that just seems very rapid for a charger.
Yeah, it does. And not only that, it comes with the software. You can program it that you charge the vehicles when the electricity rate is very low. So one of the things we look at is that they will program it in such a way that although the bus will get to the yard at around 7, you plug it in, the software will say, no, it's not time, because the utility rate is high. So it will wait till, let's say, 10 p.m. and boom. So you can regulate it to charge those vehicles at a time that you have the minimum rate. However, because you're using the software, they need some of the savings back. So that becomes your annual allowances. But given what we know, these are fast chargers. I was surprised, 2.5 hours fully charged, a whole battery for a transit vehicle. That is perhaps why the cost is higher.
So
I know I'm using up a lot of time. Have you spoken to Montgomery County? Because they also have a few transit buses, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. We have, and the Transportation Board, Ellie, I don't know whether you were at that meeting, they did bring a couple of people from Montgomery County about their transition process is similar to ours. My understanding is that the county government actually made a conscious decision to move in that direction with some funding back into that. So they have a very complex partnership with other private organizations that they are moving forward with that. As we get closer, we do attend meetings through the Office of Local Transit Support with them. And even if you have questions, we have a way that we can post it to all transit agencies in the state to share the experiences. So we will, again, talk to them, but they did a presentation before the Transportation Board not too long ago.
Do we utilize, I know when we buy electricity, we're in the, again, this might be a city manager question, but we're in the Baltimore Regional, I forget what it's called now, cooperative something or other when we buy electricity. Can we get other infrastructure through them? Can we go through them to purchase? Like, I'm wondering if that group were to get on board and actually support, I know they serve Baltimore. I'm trying to think what other jurisdictions are in that cooperative agreement, but can we purchase other things like buses?
Excuse me. That organization is called BrickPack. And I think maybe the better way to work it with them would be to have them reach out to BG&E and see if BG&E, since we'd be buying a lot of power, to see if they'd be willing to help cover the cost for the equipment installation, which would then allow us to buy power from them. So we could reach out and...
But they're just focused on power and not other kinds of
just the power.
Purchasing equipment. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's all for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Savage. Next is Alderman Gay, but I want to make just one announcement. After that, Alderwoman Finlayson, if she has some questions. And then I'm going to ask Mr. Marcus, Miss Jackie, Mr. Jim in the back, John in the back, and Mr.
Oscar.
Jim and his cohort, if they want to weigh in as well. So, and then we'll finish up if Alderwoman Tierney has had a Transportation Standing Committee wants to re-ask some questions. So, Alderman Gay.
Thanks. My first question, you mentioned that the application process for the grant started in February and ended in April. If we had this information, why didn't we apply for the grants this year?
We did not have this information at this time. If you recall, it has been about the past 2 weeks that we got most of this. In fact, it's interesting because the person that gave us the lead, we have been talking about electric buses for a long time.
We have, since about 2019, to my knowledge of being here. And so that's why I'm shocked that we missed this round. Hopefully we get the next. You mentioned a couple of times the state of Georgia contract. Could you expand on that a little more?
The state of Georgia put out a rolling stock contract, similar to what MTA is going to do in 2023. And what the state did was, on that contract, it had different types of transit vehicles. They have still clean diesel, they have electric buses of different lengths, 30, 34, 35, 40, 45, even 60. And they also have gas cutaways. So the state idea was that if we have a statewide contract, we can negotiate for better pricing. And because of that, all transit agencies, if you choose, you can buy off that contract. It also has what is called a assignability clause, which means that if you are not in the state of Georgia, you can piggyback on that contract. So we found out about it less than 10 days ago, and we got some information, we look at it, and currently that is perhaps, if the city wants to move forward, that is the best contract out there with the lowest price for the 30-foot bus. So we got that few days ago, that from the manufacturer.
Thank you. You mentioned also a relationship with MDOT and LOTS, which you explained in detail in the slide. LOTS, standing for Local Operating Transit System, has a relationship and assists the city with federal and state regulatory compliance, management, planning, and training. So I appreciate the relationship and think that it's great that they provide that resource. But in the slide, it says the goal is to start awarding contracts for zero emission vehicles by 2023. Based on what you presented to us, by 2023, we would have then already purchased 4 large vehicles. Going back to slide on page 5, the plan in fiscal year 22 is to purchase 3 30-foot heavy-duty buses, and again in fiscal year 23. So we would have purchased 4 30-foot heavy-duty buses by the time they started awarding contracts. What can you do as acting director to ensure that we don't make that mistake?
That is why I did mention that there currently exists a statewide contract that is federally compliant with electric buses. The fact that the MDOT has its contract in 2022, if the city wants to proceed, we can actually contact state of Georgia to piggyback on the existing contract. And even if it is in place, we don't have to piggyback on that. It's kind of something they write so that if you choose to piggyback on the contract, that is fine. If the city wants to move ahead right from July 1st in terms of purchasing or ordering electric buses, I will be glad to put in the request to state of Georgia and then start the paperwork with that, so we don't have to wait for FY 2023.
Yeah, I would love that. And I would like to see if there are other states that we could partner with as well. It's unfortunate that Georgia was the selection, as it's not good practically to do business with that state, just because of some of the things that they do to their on a state level in their state, and many companies have scrapped contracts with them. So maybe we could look for another state. How much annually does the city spend in gas and maintenance? I didn't see that figure on this slide.
No, but I can give you a ball number. I believe at the end of the year, I'm looking at about $185,000.
In gas?
Yeah, in gas and diesel fuel. That's a ballpark number. But we can go back at the end of this fiscal year. We get the numbers from finance, and we can get you that, because whatever amount we use is recorded, and then they send us a bill to pay. So,
and could you also ballpark in maintenance?
Maintenance, let's see. In terms of, there are a few components to that. You can have your parts and supplies that I need to go in to check the numbers for you, and then you have your labor. So in terms of diesel versus electric, the major change will be parts and supply, but not labor. So if you're doing your savings calculation for maintenance, you assume that the personnel will be still there to do your maintenance on your electric vehicles. But in this case, you are not buying transmission fluid, engine oil filters, and all those things. Mm-hmm. So for that, I don't have a number on top of my head, but you can look into that.
That's fine. I'd appreciate that. And I'm assuming that parts and supplies may be a little bit more expensive. It's obviously newer technology, but you could potentially save in labor, because if you're not fixing a vehicle as much as you would a traditional diesel vehicle, you wouldn't have the labor expenses, correct?
It's to some extent correct, but remember, this is a highly skilled technology, so whilst you can reduce the number of people who work on it, because they don't do that kind of routine maintenance like a diesel, you're going to get a highly skilled people whose rate may be higher. So at the end of the day, whilst you may have fewer people because of their labor rate, because of the technology level that they have to bring, that could be higher, and it will offset any kind of savings you get by reducing the number of personnel.
That is a very good segue into one of my next questions. as it related to, you mentioned the labor and the cost and the training that it would take and the slides as well. And so my question, it's a two-part question. One, wouldn't, obviously they would, but I'm just asking anyway for the public and for clarification. HR would assist in these training costs, I'm assuming, or there may be training cost in your budget. And then two, is what plan can be put together from the Department of Transportation's perspective to ensure that moving forward, we're providing our mechanics and our staff with the best training annually so that they don't have to go to a course to get caught up on 5 years of craftsmanship in this particular field for electrical bus, knowledge and things like that. What can we do as I asked similarly with with the Department of Public Works to ensure that the individuals that work for us, and sometimes some of them, usually majority, minority, and sometimes the lowest paid, what can we do to ensure that even if we aren't paying top dollar, they're getting the best training so that they feel that they are prepared, one, to find additional employment if necessary, and two, so that they feel comfortable in this job with the city. Is there already a training schedule that you have for your drivers and mechanics so that they just can be up to date, not just on ADA compliance and some of the things that you've mentioned, FTA compliance, but just so that they can get the best training and education possible, and we get the best bang for buck for skill?
Okay, when it comes to the electric buses, initially the training is free. The manufacturer will send a staff here to train. Given the fact that these people need to be trained together with first responders and other personnel, they will do the training before that. So irrespective of who you are, so far as you're a maintenance mechanic, you get the same training. How you apply the knowledge you get is something different, and as you know, it's very personal. The training is part of the preventive maintenance program. What happens right now is that they will identify programs that may be interested. In fact, through the Transportation Association of Maryland, where Jim is a very, I would say, good supporter, his company does support that organization. They also bring personnel for training. I quite remember one time, it was a town conference in, I think Cambridge, where they brought, is it PB, or I forget the name of the company, if you remind me, where they help with the maintenance program. So we took a couple of people here, we said who is interested, and so we pay for their hotels, everything. They were there for the training. So the training is available. We encourage them that when they identify their training needs, they should let us know and we'll make arrangements for them. I think one was about to come up recently, if you want to comment on that, for the PM maintenance that they were supposed to go before the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, they didn't go. We have made arrangements to pay for their hotels. Everybody who is in the maintenance division willing to go can sign up for that. So we do that. You want to chime in, Jim?
Okay, I'll go to the next question. We talked about benefits to the public, one being noise pollution and sound and things like that. Has there been any test as it relates, because I'm just, as we sat here, looked at some articles from NIH as it related to transportation hubs and the effects that it has on communities, in particular with cancer. Have there been any checks on one, staff who are dealing with these diesel vehicles on a daily, and two, the general public on both Drew Street, I believe it was, and Gilmer Street, and there's a nearby elementary school, and what effects the transportation center has on their health?
If you want to clarify that, transportation center meaning
the city of Annapolis transportation hub where the buses go.
The 3018 Quampin Run Road. No, I'm not aware of any test, but the bus, Actually, there is an idle policy where you are not allowed to idle the bus after 16 minutes. Typically, in winter time, the supervisors will come in to start to warm it up because they need heat. And once they do that, they leave the yard and they go on the street. Once they get back to the yard, they park the vehicle and shut it off. So I don't see how that could be an issue. If it is, we do get some visits from EPA from time to time. We have not received any finding from that. So given the fact that we do have an idling policy that you cannot idle the bus, even your personal vehicle when you park, and the transit supervisors, Marcos, and all of them, when they see it, they will say, whose car is this? You need to turn it off. And then we show you the policy and give you a warning. So because of the things that we have in place, we don't have kind of minibuses running for many hours and then causing pollution. We don't have it here in Annapolis.
I would see if we could do testing or something like that on that. I mean, obviously you are right. There are idling rules and things like that, but I could imagine that if the bus transportation center was literally in my backyard, that my health would suffer in some way, shape, or form, and we could be preventive there as well. By transferring to a more energy efficient fleet. A couple of more questions, and then I'm wrapping up here. One is actually to the meter program. Could you expand a little bit more on that? There was just a line about it, but it talked about assistance we could receive in the transfer process.
Yeah, when we were talking to a company called Ampli Power, which is on the state of Georgia contract to provide this charging infrastructure. So I asked them, is there any opportunity where we can have a company put in for free? The way that he explained this is it's just like you bought a new house, right? And you have all your electrical, everything set up, but you don't have external power source to connect to that. So BGE comes in, do all the work outside at no cost to you, and then hook your house to that. How do they recoup the installation cost, the labor and everything that they put in? Is through using the electricity over time. So your utility bill, in terms of rating, has some inbuilt kinds of costs to cover that. So that's how it works. Whether it will work for Annapolis or not, we don't know. That's why we are exploring that to see the feasibility of it here. So that's one option to look at. If it doesn't work because it's for a commercial vehicle, then you will look into the cost of the infrastructure. If we apply for the no grants and we get it, a part of it goes to pay for the cost of the infrastructure, which in this case is one-time cost. The rest would be kind of just your electricity bill as you use it. So that's how I believe it works. I don't have first-time experience with that. But as we move forward in the infrastructure for the charging stations, will become very, very important, and you learn more about that. Jim, do you have anything to add since you have been Oscar?
Yes, hi, this is Oscar Cardenas with Eldorado National. First of all, I want to commend you for taking on this challenge.
Can you speak up a bit, sir? We can hardly hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see what I can do here. If I can make
Okay,
it better.
thank
Is that better?
It's
Is that
getting
better?
there.
It's the speaker, probably.
Yeah. So, like I said, I commend you for taking on this challenge. You've discussed some very important topics that are part of this octopus that has many tentacles in order to get it done right. You mentioned the size of the buses. Very important to right size your buses. Very important to do analysis of your routes and make sure that the bus you're getting has enough battery power to complete your day's work. With that said, there's a bit of a conflict in that the smaller buses, even a 30-foot bus, carries a lighter load of batteries. They simply can't carry the amount of weight that the big heavy-duty buses carry. We're talking about maybe, 250 to 300 kilowatt batteries on a 30-foot bus. And to put that in perspective, a house uses 30 kilowatts in a day. So it's enough to power 10 houses. And you're charging that bus every day. So you must ensure that you have the infrastructure at your charging depot to be able to have the input power required to be able to charge the buses. And then you balance that with the ability to complete your route over, I think you mentioned 18 hours. Again, some back of the envelope calculations. The typical transit bus will use anywhere between 2 and 3 kilowatts to the mile. So if you've got 300 kilowatts on a bus, you're looking at 100 miles is a realistic range based on those calculations. The minute you turn on a heater or an air conditioning unit, you're going to lose probably another 2 kilowatts to the mile. So now you're down to half that range. So yes, it is important to have the right size buses, and there was a lot of talk about the smaller cutaway buses. There are some in development, but again, putting that in perspective, they're going to be smaller, lighter, and able to carry even less batteries. So the heavy duty buses right now are where the state of the art is. I don't see the smaller buses catching up in the very near future.
I had a couple of questions that I didn't get a chance to finish with. Jackie, I'm sorry, Director Rouse or City Manager Rouse, would you be responsible for managing performance measures for this program?
That's Ms. Guile.
I'm sorry, Ms. Gao. I don't know.
There's Jackie Rouse.
Yeah.
That's one of the 3 Jackies in the city. I would expect that the performance measures are being measured by Department of Transportation. They have the data on usage, they have the data on miles, gas used, et cetera. And that's all the type of data we're going to need for grant applications as well. So we should be gathering that.
But they would report to you though, right?
I would work with them to make sure I understood where things were going and how we're progressing. Yes.
Okay. 2 more questions. Because we talked about the batteries and the size and concern there. So my first question is there opportunity to access the city's power grid that they have over at Waterworks Park? How could that play into this? What's happening with that stored energy and capacity there? And 2, if cities like Paris, Los Angeles, Copenhagen, Barcelona, Quito, Vancouver, Mexico City, Milan, Seattle, Auckland, and Cape Town can convert their fleets to fully electric buses by 2025, with in particular places like Seattle and Los Angeles that are within the United States, much larger places than us. How are they tapping into energy efficient activity to have their buses roaming on a more frequent basis? If we're 7 square miles, I'm just not understanding how a vehicle that how it can't be working all day long. Even if you do run through your 300 miles, take a 2-hour break to charge, couldn't you put it back on the road? How would you put the electric buses into the fleet?
Oscar, you want to?
Yeah. Oscar, you want to tackle this as you're in LA, or do you want me to go into, why some of the New York Cities, Los Angeles, Chicago's are pulling their electric vehicles off the road because they don't have enough power? 518 kilowatts on a 40-foot transit bus, that's half a megawatt. 10 transit vehicles, that's 5 megawatts, which is a lot of draw on the grid. So they're to the point where they jump forward really quickly. They kind of put the cart before the horse, and now they're taking steps back to go, okay, we need to study this more and see where the power is coming from. How are they going to keep these vehicles on the road and do what they're supposed to, which is certainly provide a cleaner environment for us all. Oscar, you're in LA. You know what they're doing there?
Yeah. Well, the state of California passed an act called the Innovative Clean Transportation Act that required tiered implementation of electric buses from, beginning now to 2035, at which point you won't be able to buy an internal combustion vehicle, or bus rather, in California. There are a lot of challenges meeting the requirements of that act, and it's simply put, there's not enough power. We would literally have to double the grid capacity to be able to power all electric buses if the fleet became that large. Now your fleet is not as large, but it's going to have challenges of its own. LA right now operates electric buses on what are called dedicated busways. You will not see the electric buses on mainstream transit. They have some buses on order with BYD, some 40 buses that have not yet to be delivered, and those are meant to run on the regular service, but they are not operating as of now. There are other agencies throughout the area that have electric buses. Foothill Transit being one that comes to mind. They were one of the very first adopters of the technology, and they've made it work. They make it work. They have a transit center, actually a couple of transit centers, so the buses can actually, while in service, they can stop at the transit centers and recharge while the driver is in a dwell period, because otherwise they wouldn't make the routes.
Don't gas buses stop too to fill up, right? You run out of gas or something, but you have to stop. Okay.
Absolutely, of course.
Yeah. I just would hope that we could get this done. I mean, it's been a long time, and it's been 2 years for me, 2.5 years of hearing the proposals, and so excited, glad that we could get this information. Hope that we could rid of some of these federal requirements that have just stood in the way for far too long, and take advantage of some of the proposals from this current administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Gay. Alderwoman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Duwa and your team for this information. One of my questions, I think, was answered, and that had to do with the charging stations. 175,000 for, and I noticed Frederick was able to do 10 charging stations, I believe, for that amount.
Yes, please.
Okay. My other question had to do with the Frederick County case study that you provided, the overview for. How long have they had their buses where they were determining the pains, as they call them, the growing pains?
If you look at page 21, it gives you the service year, which is 2016. 2016, yeah.
So.
And they did the calculations of the savings for the first 4.5 years. So those numbers that you have here is a little bit older because it's now past about getting to 5 years. Not only that, they have taken delivery of the electric bus that we did show, the 30-foot one, I think in April. So as they have many more electric vehicles in their fleet, the savings numbers will go up. How they did calculate it, I'm yet to ask, but I did ask their permission to share this information with this body, that at least whilst we are thinking of the huge initial cost, particularly if you don't get enough grant funds, in the backyard, we still have savings like this coming in back to the city.
So is the notation on the bottom of page 23 from them that indicates they're not committed to purchasing any more of these electric buses until there's a direct replacement for? So they're not buying any more until they have vacancies in their fleet?
I cannot say that. What they're saying is that I think there was a perception among them that once they start replacing their older fleet with battery electric buses, it will continue until all the diesel buses are replaced. Mm-hmm. I think that statement is saying that, wait a minute, we may have a pause here until the battery technology is such that, as Oscar did allude to, can allow the bus to be used in the service all day long. And I will point to you, there is, what is it, this is from FTA. Back in 2005, when they did look at electric drive technologies, including electric battery. And the conclusion from that study is saying that, yes, we would like to go that way. Yes, we will. But two things: funding, because the prices of this are huge. And secondly, exactly what Frederick County is saying, that unless we are convinced that the battery capacity is enough to run the bus all day, there is no commitment yet. That doesn't mean that it will not change the next year or whatever, but that is a statement from there. Basically saying we need to be very careful in our analysis, and that's why Jim and Oscar are here to give us information in terms of transition. You did just hear what happened to the LA and the buses they are pulling back because they don't have enough power. So that's what it is. How it's interpreted, I think, is up for grabs, but my take on that is that as we move forward, we need to make sure that we have done the best we can to avoid any kind of disruption or kind of saying, I wish we haven't gone that way. That's all that it means.
Well, I guess my question is about whether the industry has perfected the product. You said no.
Yes, ma'am. I said no.
You know what I mean? Frederick was probably first out of the gate with this 5 years ago.
Frederick and Howard County.
And Howard County. So are they at a point, is the industry at a point where the product is as good? Is it good enough for others to start to invest? Have all the, like any new product, the first year or two or three, there's always some quirks that have to be worked out. So have we gotten beyond that period now where it's kind of safe, I guess, to purchase the product because, it's better than it was, or it's good now,
It is, and the technology is certainly increasing almost daily. Is it to a point now? I think that would be a case-by-case study. It really depends on the agency, what their routes are. The city of Annapolis, I think, would be a good, viable agency for zero-emission vehicles. You get into shore transit on the Eastern Shore, where they have some routes that are 400 miles a day. It may not be viable for them. And it's, I'm not anti-environment or anti-electric, just pro-math. If you look at, what would work. And I think Annapolis has some routes that it would be a really good agency to go to zero emission.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, and the technology is just going to get better. Oscar, you may be able to address, do you think that it's going to peak at some point? Are we going to get to a point where, a battery can only provide so much power, but they make it lighter?
Unless there's a quantum development in battery technology, I think we're pretty close to what the manufacturers can do now. They claim they can get maybe another 5 or 10% of energy density into the batteries. But again, the propulsion system, the bus itself, it's state of the art, and it is proven. No matter which manufacturer you select, the rub is with the batteries. Who makes the batteries that can give you the most range and the most reliability.
Thank you.
Thank you. Being mindful of everyone's time, we have 25 minutes, so we're going to go to Mr. Marcus, Ms. Jackie, Mr. John, SP Plus, and Mr. Jim and Mr. Oscar, and Alderwoman Tierney as our chair of our Transportation Committee.
Hi, Marcus Moore here. I don't have a whole lot more to add other than what Dr. Duar was talking about as far as infrastructure. When we talk about the people aspect of it all, as Mr. Martin mentioned, and Kaku second there, that as the buses will be ordered, training will be made available. that will be based on the technology of which bus we actually get. All of them are battery or electric vehicles, but the company that we'll work with will provide that kind of training. And as Dr. Duas said, once we place the order, we have 12 months. What he was also alluding to, some of the other training that we're doing that's ongoing, pre-pandemic, we did find a few things that were face-to-face right here in our own area. And months later, they said we can do it virtually. And a lot of guys that are technicians want to put their hands on things. They don't want to do the virtual because they have to really see how that gidget fits in with whatever else. So we do have a lot of training that is ongoing. It'll be interesting to see with electric vehicles as far as the tools and things that we need, as far as our infrastructure in the back office to keep things running. But we're excited about the challenge. We have some very talented people that are like sponges that will be able to absorb the new technology and new training that's as is presented. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marcus. If we were going to purchase a train, I think we'd ask you about that, and that's a side conversation, but thank you.
I just have a few comments on issues that have been raised today. First of all, there was a question that Alderwoman Tierney raised about emissions reduction, and the 4 buses that Montgomery County invested in recently, they estimated that they would reduce about more than 155 tons of carbon emissions over their lifetime. So that's the kind of numbers we're looking at. That's just with 4 buses in their fleet, and those are the 30-foot buses. As far as other counties and cities that have been successful, most of them have been successful because they've partnered with their local utility. So they're doing off-peak charging, so not between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m., so they have discounted rates. They're looking at limited demand charging, so lower rates, not looking at the highest 15-minute interval for their rates, and things like what City Manager Gerald suggested is negotiating a contract with a reduced rate overall for the power that we would use for the electric buses and perhaps our fleet as well. And then as far as, there's another question that was raised by one of you about recycling. There's more and more opportunities for recycling batteries, as well as the components of the batteries. Some companies will take them at no charge, and others will pay for the components. They can be used in power walls, which are the integrated battery systems that are used to charge solar arrays. So that's one use, just as an example. So some of the solar companies will reuse the batteries for that purpose. Another issue to consider is, I mean, Alderman Gay raised, is, sort of alluded to, is collaborative purchasing, so a regional approach. Could we be purchasing and getting discounts if we purchased in bulk with Anne Arundel County and or PG County, Howard County, our neighboring counties, or even on a state, so on a mid-Atlantic basis? So that's something to look into, whether we could do some kind of collaborative purchasing arrangement to reduce the cost. It'll be interesting to further research to provide what types of buses our federal or state grants would fund. I'm wondering, not to answer this right now, but Dr. Dew and I can discuss further, what can Annapolis do to make us as a city more attractive to grantors? So would it be, putting in EV charging units already, converting over our fleet, other steps? What would make us most attractive in a grant application? So we can look into that further. One question I had for BG&E, because I'm working with them on our charging units in the city, is what type of charging units are required for buses? They did say that for the 30-foot buses and larger, the DC fast chargers, especially if they need to recharge during the day, are the best way to go. But if we're able to charge buses overnight, the L2, which are the smaller, cheaper chargers, can be used. So a bus could get a full charge overnight on an L2. And it sounds like that our range, and Dr. Dual can correct me, in the city is about 150 miles in a day for our buses. And these buses on one charge could go 150 to 200 miles, depending on the type of bus that is purchased. So it sounds like we wouldn't even need to recharge. There's a possibility that we could have a combination for the bus depot of the DC fast chargers and the L2s, which could drop that $175,000 number for the units, the 5 to 10 units, a bit. So we could do overnight charging, especially if we're off-peak charging, if we had the software so that they would click on when it's off-peak hours. It reduces, how much you're actually charged for the charge. And it sounds like that's what we would be doing based on the range of the buses and what's required of them in Annapolis. Let's see, some other comments I had. Yeah, just it looks like, we need to do some data gathering on what we're actually using as far as gas and for maintenance and miles traveled, especially on routes where we could use smaller buses. I'm interested in the ridership numbers, and if we actually do need 30-foot buses, perhaps we could use smaller buses on some routes and run them more often. There is plenty of data that the maintenance of EV vehicles, including buses, is lower. You require fewer staff, and once they're trained, they're trained. So we're future training our maintenance crews and making them more appeal if they should choose to apply to other types of jobs. And so the training is, once for the major training and then updates. But there, as Dr. Duat testified, there's free training from the manufacturers initially, but of course they would need future training. But this is the way that the future is going as EV, so we do need to train our maintenance crew in how to maintain EV vehicles. Let's see, anything else here? I talked about recycling. Oh, and also I know this wasn't raised, but as far as reliability and when you're looking at some of the earlier models, the extreme temperatures were a problem, but that technology is much improved. Albuquerque, New Mexico, so an extreme heat area, is using EV buses now, and in Montreal, as Alderman Arnett pointed out, they're using buses. So you have the two extremes, and the technology has improved to the point, and there's planning that's involved in when you charge your buses, how you house your buses, et cetera, when you use your buses, when you do have extreme temperatures. And so for us, it would be the middle of the summer and the middle of the winter. And I believe that is the extent of my comments just on what's been discussed today.
Thank you, Ms. Scott.
You're welcome.
All righty, I think SP Plus, and then we'll wrap up with Mr. Jim and Mr. Oscar. Oh, you need to come to the mic, please, John. Thank you.
How's that? Okay.
Good.
Thanks again for having us. I'll keep it short and just report that with respect to the circulator, we are gathering formal pricing to replace the existing circulator units with direct replacements. It just so happens that our vendor is taking delivery of similarly sized units that they had earmarked for a different contract that didn't go through. And so we'll be interested to see what that might look like in terms of cost for the city as a comparison. But alternatively, we're also looking at reducing the unit sizes and perhaps considering an array of smaller vehicles, as we've discussed, as we've heard today. There aren't really any vehicles that will work below the cutaway size. The circulator at current is of that cutaway size, if you will. And then below that, there's really not a vehicle that works yet, other than the much smaller sort of gem cars, if you will, the 6-passenger carts that we are familiar with in town. And so we're looking at also an array of those as a potential replacement. So we'll look forward to reporting back on those two scenarios, but are certainly happy to be engaged with part of the effort here.
Yes, go ahead. Oh,
Thank you. Kevin mentioned to me that there was, I think, a company that your company had also a program in California, I think in partnership with one of the baseball teams or something like that, where they just updated a really cool electric monorail system or something like that. Could you expand on that a little
Sure.
bit more?
Yeah, that's
because as a private company, you guys have a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm very, very interested in what you guys can do as well.
Yep. So I'm glad you raised that. So as part of the new development project, mixed-use development project, but highlighted by the New York Islanders hockey arena in Long Island. It's a large campus, and they're deploying electric transit on campus, if you will. And they do have those intermediate-sized units, so smaller than the Cutaway, more efficient, not as small as the GEM car, right? So 10, 12, 15 passenger, kind of the sweet spot here for us. But unfortunately, those vehicles are do not go fast enough for their weight to be granted a VIN number, and therefore cannot be driven on public streets. So they're okay when they're in the enclosure, in a privately enclosed footprint, if you will. But unfortunately, we're not there yet as a technology where they can be issued a VIN number and therefore be driven on the streets. But I'm glad you raised that, because that really is that's the sweet spot. I wish they were. Yep.
Thank you. And Mr. Jim and Mr. Oscar.
Just want to thank everyone for your time. Certainly appreciate this. This is a new one for me. Oscar, do you have any closing comments?
I do have a comment. This is the momentum for electric buses is growing daily. It kind of started a groundswell here in California, and it's moving cross country. We have found, we build an electric bus and a hydrogen fuel cell electric bus. We have found that the successful projects tend to be those where a lot of the upfront work is done upfront. And there are a couple of companies, consulting companies, that really specialize in this right from the start, analyzing your operation, analyzing your routes. They do the grant writing, and they're very good at grant writing. They participate in almost all the Low-No grants. I would suggest to the city that you consider interviewing them and see if it's a fit for you. Typically, when you hire them, their fees come right out of the grant, so it's transparent to the agency. And like I said, they've been very successful. They've done a very good job across country.
What's the name of the company again, Mr. Oscar?
Well, two that come to mind is the Center for Transportation and the Environment, and the other is
Center for Transportation for the Environment.
Yeah, Center for Transportation and the Environment. And the other one is CalStart, CalStart.
Spell that again, please.
CalStart.
Just CalStart.
Okay.
CalStart.
And
there's other agencies, and I imagine you have regional ones there, but those two do work nationwide. They have offices nationwide.
Okay. Thank you.
Jim can get the full details and then forward it to me, and I can share with the city manager and the rest of the staff. Yeah.
Sounds like you got a couple things on your to-do list, Dr. Duwa. Thank you.
Johns Hopkins used CTE
when
they're getting ready to implement an electric or electrifying their fleet for the hospital. So
just for their hospital campus.
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you.
There are quite a few colleges are really are pushing for zero emission vehicles. So
okay.
Yep, Towson, UMBC, University of Maryland, University of Delaware, that we're working with in CTEs. They're a great company to really study your transit operations and suggest and provide what would work best for you all. So
okay,
it's a good
great.
way.
Thanks
It's
for
a
the
really
information.
good way to go.
To Jim's point, getting a favorable look at your grant application often means partnering up with a university or another community hub, universities, hospitals that could help that grant application. Like I said, these folks, they know where to go for the money.
Okay.
To add to that, the Office of Local Transit Support within the MTA, they have notified us that they will send their experts here to take a look at our routes and building and make recommendations. So while the state is moving forward, they are not leaving the local transit agencies hanging. They will be providing technical support, just similar to what Oscar is talking about, to help us move forward. But the question is timing. So if you have patience to wait, that will come in handy at no cost to the city. And then we can also use the additional information we are getting from Oscar to move forward with that.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Duwa and Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have, Oscar actually stole my thunder on two issues. I guess they're not really questions, they're just some comments. First, on sort of combining our efforts, you mentioned on page 13 about a consolidated state proposal. And is there any possibility that we would, Oscar mentioned universities, is there any strength in numbers if we put in a proposal with other municipalities? I mean, is there any economy of scale? It says here, eligible applicants, states and other eligible applicants also may submit consolidated proposals for projects in urbanized areas. And I guess that would be us.
Yeah. You want to comment on that?
Nope. That's all.
Yes. What I think I did, Frederick County was the county government itself, Maryland Department of Energy, MDOT and MTA actually all help with them. So that is the numbers we are looking at. When we start writing or preparing for a low-no emission grant, I believe that's what you're talking about. We have reached out to companies similar to what Oscar was talking about that will basically walk us through to make sure that our grant application will be given some attention and probably more likely get some money to begin this project. So we are not alone in this. I also know that if you reach out to the MTA office, they will provide, they do have some consultant that we can utilize in this effort. So they will be willing to. So we will reach out to everybody that can help us move forward, especially that is a good amount of money. That is on top of your regular grants. Mm-hmm. So we will, we have every intention to pursue it next time around.
Okay. That's great to hear. Just some closing comments. What I've learned as transportation chair is that our city departments and our consultants are a wealth of information. They have the expertise, and Dr. Duar, I really appreciate you bringing everybody in to demonstrate that. You are all the experts, and what you sometimes wait for is the go switch. And I have to applaud my colleagues, Alderman Savage and Alderman Gay, for being, saying this is we're sort of in an urgent mode here. However, I do want to say that, Dr. Duar, you are in a conundrum, as you and I talked about. We have, the reality is that we have an existing fleet of buses trudging along, and they're underutilized. So is that a question of the routes themselves? Is it a question of excitement? Will electric buses bring excitement? We don't know the answer to that. And Oscar brought up a point about the sort of a consultant in evaluating our routes, because when I look at page 3, the engineer in me, my head explodes, because there's absolutely no correlation between what you would expect a correlation to be between the efficiency of the vehicles and their expectancy, their life expectancy. There's just no correlations, and I see that as a product of the routes. So we don't know if smaller vehicles will be more efficient than bigger vehicles. I looked at just this, what Marcus gave us, and just the discrepancy between these two vehicles and their battery usage. So it's a real quantum physics thing here on what is the sweet spot, what is that size vehicle for the routes and the routes, and are the routes given? I mean, that's the thing. Are our routes efficient? So gets a little bit complicated before we do, a switcheroo from, diesel to electric. So again, I've been working with Kwaku the last month, and he has just been a rock star, and I just want to thank you for bringing everybody together and taking this on, and I really know that we're going to be moving forward in the most efficient way possible. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Alderwoman Tierney. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here today for this presentation. It's been very enlightening. We're coming up to speed, and like Alderwoman Tierney said, we're kind of at a sweet spot, a crossroads, a conundrum, but we're going to get there, and because we got all the right people at the table. So anyway, thank you all so much. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item on the agenda?
I just have one last question, Madam Chair. Would Thursday work to swing by Department of Transportation, maybe ride some routes and just get a better understanding? I know I promised you that, Kwaku. Would Thursday morning work? Maybe up until about 12, or actually we have a work session, so maybe up until about 2?
I have scheduled safety meetings that day, but how about Friday?
I can do Friday too, that's even better. Maybe like from what, should I get there 8 to?
Yeah, before 9, I think we have a 4th of July planning session around 10:30.
Okay.
My calendar. I can email you.
Yeah, perfect. Let's coordinate via email then. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Alderman Gay. The agenda has been completed. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Hearing none. We are now adjourned. It is 5:27. Thank you all so much.